Good evening, Year 11. This is your night before news for your English language paper 1, which you will sit on Monday, the 26th of February. So, key information that you're going to need to know about Monday's paper. So, the paper will be 1 hour and 45 minutes, and this paper is focused on a fiction text. You will have to complete 5 questions in total, 4 reading questions and 1 writing question. The timings are as follows. So reading the text, you should spend 10 minutes. Question 1, 5 minutes. Question 2, 10 minutes. Question 3, 10 minutes. Question 4, 25 minutes. And question 5, 45 minutes. So the first thing that you need to do once you commence your exam is read the text provided. That will help you answer questions 1 to 4. The time that you have for this is 10 minutes. It won't take you 10 minutes to read the text, but I would advise that you spend time reading the source really carefully and that you read it at least twice before you even begin to look at and try and answer any of the questions. So let's read the text. This extract is from the beginning of a short story by H.E. Bates set in the 1930s. Hartop and his wife own a van from which they sell produce to people in the local area, and their daughter Alice works with them. A Ford motor van, old and repainted green with Joe's Hartop greengrocer's rabbit scratched in streaky white lettering on a flattened out biscuit tin nailed to the side, was slowly travelling across a high, treeless stretch of country in squally November half-darkness. Rain hailed on the windscreen and periodically swished like a sea wave on the sheaves of pink chrysanthemums strung on the van lid. Hartop was driving. A thin, angular man, starved face, he seemed to occupy almost all of the seat. Sprawling awkwardly so that his wife and their daughter Alice sat squeezed up, the girl with her arms flat as though ironed against her side, her thin legs pressed tight together into the size of one. The Hartops' faces seemed moulded in clay, and in the light from the van lamps were a flat swede colour. Like the man, the 2 women were thin, with a screwed-up thinness that made them look both hard and frightened. Hartop drove with great caution, grasping the wheel tightly, braking hard at the bends, his big yellowish eyes fixed ahead, perturbantly with vigilance. His hands, visible in the faint dashboard light, were marked on the backs with the dark smears of dried rabbit's blood. The van fussed and rattled, the chrysanthemums always swishing, rain-soaked in the sudden high wind squalls, and the 2 women sat in a state of silent apprehension, their bodies not moving except to lurch with the van, their clayish faces continuously intent, almost scared in the lamp gloom. And after some time, Hartop gave a slight start and then drew the van to the roadside and stopped it. "Hear anything drop?" he said. "I thought I heard something." "It's the wind," the woman said. I can hear it all the time. "No, something dropped." They sat listening, but the engine still ticked and they could hear nothing beyond it but the wind and rain squalling in the deep grass along the roadside. "Alice, you get out," Hartop said. The girl began to move herself almost before he had spoken. "Get out and see if you can see anything." Alice stepped across her mother's legs, groped with blind instinct for the step, and then got out. It was raining furiously. The darkness seemed solid with rain. "See anything?" Hartop said. "No." Hartop leaned across his wife and shouted, "Go back a bit and see what it was." The woman moved to protest, but Hartop was already speaking again. "Something dropped. We'll stop at Drake's turn. You'll catch up. I know something dropped." He let in the clutch as he was speaking, and the van began to move again. Soon, to Alice, it seemed to be moving very rapidly. In the rain and the darkness, all she could see was the tall light smoothly receding. She watched it for a moment and then began to walk back along the road. The wind was behind her, but repeatedly it seemed to veer and smash her with the rain full in the face. She walked without hurrying. She seemed to accept the journey as she accepted the rain and her father's words quite stoically. She walked in the middle of the road, looking directly ahead as though she had a long journey before her. She could see nothing. And then, after a time, she stumbled against something in the road. She stopped and picked up a bunch of pink chrysanthemums, and then she began to walk back with them along the road. Before very long, she could see the red tail light of the van again. It was stationary. She could also see the lights of the house, little squares of yellow, which the recurrent rain on her lashes transformed into sudden stars. When she reached the van, Mrs. Hartop said, "What was it?" "Only a bunch of chrysanthemums." Hartop himself appeared at the very moment she was speaking. "Only?" he said. "Only? What do you mean by only, eh?" Alice stood mute. Then Hartop raised his voice. "Well, don't stand there. Do something. Go on, go on. Go and see who wants a bunch of chrysanthemums. Move yourself." Alice obeyed at once. She picked up the flowers, walked away and vanished, all without a word. Question 1 is going to require you to list 4 things. There are 4 marks available for this question and you should spend up to 5 minutes. Make sure that you're only taking information from the relevant part of the text, and to be safe, pick only explicit information. Start your answer with the focus of the question. So let's have a look at question 1 of this particular paper. List 4 things about the motor van, and it asks you to look at lines 1 to 5, which you can also see on the screen. So 4 things about the motor van. We should make sure that we're writing in full sentences and that each of our answers starts with the motor van. So, a Ford motor van, old and repainted green, with Joe's Hartop green grocer rabbits scratched in streaky white lettering on a flattened out biscuit tin nailed to the side, was slowly travelling across a high treeless stretch of country in squally November half darkness. Rain hailed on the windscreen and periodically swished like a sea wave on the sheaves of pink chrysanthemums strung on the van roof. Right, put a timer on, spend 4 to 5 minutes, write down 4 things about the motor van, starting with the motor van. So possible answers are included on this slide. So for example, you could have said it's old, it's a Ford, it has a windscreen, it has a roof, it's repainted green, or even just it's repainted, or it's green, or the van's been painted green. There are multiple options here about what would be an acceptable answer. So use your green pen to mark your answers, a total mark out of 4. Question 2 is the language analysis question. There are 8 marks available for this question and you should spend 10 minutes. You need to make sure that you're only taking information from the relevant part of the text as outlined in the question. And in terms of process, firstly, come up with an overall answer to the question. Then select implicit evidence that matches your answer. Mention a method, so that could be a simile, a metaphor, a word choice. And then you need to analyse the evidence and how it matches your idea. I think talk first about the connotations of the words in the quotation and then the way in which that word is used in the context of the text. So here's the question. Look again at lines 6 to 12, and I've put lines 6 to 12 on the slide. How does the writer use language to describe the Hartop family? So as I said, you'd first think about overall, based on those 6 lines, what impression are we getting of the Hartop family? Then we would select evidence that kind of matches that idea. So how do we know? How did we come up with that idea in the first place? What evidence could we use? And then thinking about how we're going to analyse that evidence in support of our original idea and to answer the question. So to give you an example of what a really good answer would look like, in the extract, the writer uses language to describe the Hartop family as unhappy and malnourished. The use of the metaphor in the Hartop's faces seen moulded in clay seems to suggest that the whole family wear the same expression and that it is fixed. The use of the word moulded, which links to a material being shaped, and then the use of the word clay, which quickly sets and solidifies, suggests that the Hartops are stuck with the same unhappy expression that does not change, and this is perhaps due to their poverty. Clay is often grey in colour, and grey often links with illness, which helps to show the poor state of health of the family, and perhaps the fact that the situation is fixed and moulded like clay. So what you'll see from this answer is I've started with an overall idea that links to the question. So I've said the Hartop family are unhappy and malnourished. I've then picked a piece of evidence and made sure that I mention a method. So within that sentence there is a metaphor. I've then explained my overall understanding of what that shows us about the Hartops, but then broken it down into smaller parts. So I know that I wanted to speak about the word moulded, so to suggest fixed. And I wanted to talk about the word clay because, again, that's something that becomes quite solid and fixed and unchangeable, but also the way in which the colour of clay could signify something about the Hartop family. Right, now over to you. I want you to put a 10-minute timer on, and I want you to have a go at completing the process that I have just done. So coming up with an overall idea about the family, picking some evidence, mentioning a method, but also thinking about how that evidence helps support that overall idea. Question 3 is going to require you to do analysis of structure. Again, this is an 8-mark question. You have up to 10 minutes, but this time you need to comment on the whole of the text with a focus on 3 key parts: beginning, turning point, and end. Firstly, think about the focus at each point in the text. Then think about what we find out at each point. So say, for example, the writer is focused on the character. What do we find out about the character? Then select some evidence to support what we find out. And this is the important bit. You then need to explain why you think the writer is focused on this detail. So, for example, are they creating a narrative hook? Are they trying to build tension? Are they foreshadowing something that's going to happen later on? You know, when we think about an ending, are they leaving the text on a cliffhanger, so leaving the reader guessing? Are they creating a cyclical structure? So looking at what the question says, no matter what paper you get, the question 3 is always the same. So it'll always say, you now need to refer to the whole source. How does the writer structure the text to interest you as a reader? So let's practice together, focusing on what we would say about the beginning. Okay, so I would consider the first couple of paragraphs as the beginning of a text, and I would be keeping in mind at each point, beginning, turning point, and end, 3 questions. What does the writer focus on? What do we find out about what it is they're focusing on? And why do we think the writer focuses on these details? So just to give you an example of what that first paragraph might look like, at the beginning of the text, the writer focuses on the description of the Hartop family and their motor van. The writer quickly establishes for us that the family are living in poverty and are malnourished, as the van is described as old and the family thin. By focusing on the descriptions of the family and the state of disrepair of the van, the writer begins to build tension for the reader as we are left wondering how the Hartops will be able to escape or improve their situation. So I've clearly focused on the beginning of the text. I've said what the writer is focusing on, so the Hartop family and the motor van. I've talked about what we find out about the Hartops and their van, so the fact that they're living in poverty and they're malnourished, and I've used evidence of the van being old and the family thin to support that. But then I've thought about why the writer is telling us about these things at the beginning of the text. Well, I think that the writer is trying to build tension. We know that the family are living in poverty, and it kind of might link to what happens next, build tension towards like the main events of the text. So like we did with question 2, I want you to again put on a 10-minute timer. Now I want you to try and have a go at following the process that I've just gone through with looking at the beginning of the text. This time you're going to do 2 paragraphs, the turning point and the ending. The relevant sections I've put on the slide for you. But remember, use these questions to guide what you're going to write. So what does the writer focus on at this point in the text? What do we find out? And why does the writer focus on these details? The last reading question on the paper, question 4, is an evaluation question. Just to be clear, the evaluation question is asking you to reach a judgment based on evidence. There are 20 marks available for this question, so it is worth a quarter of the marks of the paper, and therefore we need to make sure that we are writing enough for this question, and we've got about up to 25 minutes of time that we could use for this question. You need to make sure that when you comment that you're only commenting on the part of the text that is identified in the question. It's a common mistake that actually students start taking evidence from other parts. Then I think you need to look at your statement, which will generally have 2 parts, and identify what those 2 parts are. Once you know what you're being asked to evaluate or comment on, you need to make a judgment. So do you completely agree or partially agree with the statement? Whatever you say, you then need to provide implicit evidence that helps support your evaluative judgment. And you need to analyse how exactly that evidence supports your opinion. It is important that you respond to both parts of the statement, because you will be limiting yourself on marks if you don't. Okay, so here's your question. Look at lines 34 to the end. A student said, this part of the story where Alice is sent back along the road to find what has fallen from the roof and returns with the chrysanthemum shows how hard and cruel Hartop is, so that all of our sympathy is with Alice. To what extent do you agree with the student? So essentially you're being asked to respond to two things. Is in your opinion Hartop hard and cruel, and have you got evidence to back that up? And is all of our sympathy with Alice? So for ease, I have included the relevant section of the text that you are going to need to refer to when you are preparing your answer for question 4. Just spend a couple of moments reading back through this section of the text. Keep in mind the two statements. Is there evidence to support the idea that Hartop is hard and cruel? Is there evidence to support the idea that all of our sympathy is with Alice? So again, to give you an example, this is not a complete answer because I've only responded to one of the statements, but just use as an example to show you how you might format your answer. I partially agree with the statement. It is clear from the way that Hartop speaks and behaves that he can be hard and cruel. Whilst I do feel sympathy for Alice, I cannot say that all of my sympathy is with her, as the whole of the family is shown to be living in poverty. In the extract, the use of the repetition of the interrogative sentences from Hartop, only, what do you mean by only, helped to show Hartop's frustration with the situation and Alice's lack of understanding of the importance of the dropped flowers. Hartop perhaps shouldn't speak to his daughter in this way, however it is perfectly understandable that he would be frustrated the flowers have dropped, as this is something he can sell and make money from, and if they are ruined he can no longer do this. Hartop's frustration could be driven by the pressure of having to feed and clothe his family, and therefore it is hard as the reader not to feel sorry for him. So I've said that I partially agree, so I'm implying that I agree with Hartop being hard and cruel, but not that all of my sympathy is with Alice, and I've given a reason for that. Then I have talked about a quotation that helps to support my evaluation. I've mentioned repetition and interrogative sentences, which is my method, and then I've clearly explained how that evidence helps to support my evaluation of the statement. Okay, over to you again. So I want you to, again, copy the process that I've just gone through, writing your own paragraph responding to the statement. Now, it might be that you decide to focus on Hartop being hard and cruel and evidence to support that, or you could talk about your sympathy being with Alice. So that question 1 to 4, they're your reading questions. Now we are going to go on to question 5, which is your writing question, where you're going to be required to write either a story or a description. This question is worth 40 marks out of 80, so it's worth 50% of the paper. So it is important that you save yourself at least 45 minutes to complete this question. When you go into your paper, you'll have a choice of two, one that generally is based on an image and one that is based on a prompt for a story. You must pick one. Remember that when you are writing, you need to think about the structure and the order of events, and to do that you need to plan first so that you clearly know where your story is going. Some of the structures that we've looked at for how to plan a story is somewhere, so where's the story set, someone, who's your character, something, what's going to happen when your story reaches its most tense part, the climax, and then how are you going to resolve it at the end. You're being assessed on your ability to describe well and create an engaging story. So here's an example of what question 5 might look like. Your school or college is asking students to contribute some creative writing for its website. Either describe a marketplace as suggested by this picture, or write a story with the title Abandoned. I would suggest that in the test you spend about 5 minutes planning out exactly what's going to happen. You'll be familiar with this creative writing planning sheet that you might use for a story. So as I identified before, somewhere, someone, something, climax, and then resolution. At each point, you need to think about how you are going to build up towards the next. We would encourage you to start with pathetic fallacy and maybe a really engaging opening sentence, but at each point in your story, you need to be making sure you're using some of those consciously crafted sentences and language techniques to create imagery for your reader. What I would like you to do now is go back to slide 22, pick one of the questions and spend 5 to 10 minutes planning out what you're going to do. Here is a list of consciously crafted sentences. I would recommend that you pick 3 to 4 that you are going to use in your writing and spend some time actually crafting those sentences ready for when you write your story. Finally, let's have a go. So spend maybe 10 minutes writing your first paragraph. Remember, begin with a really engaging opening sentence that maybe kind of suggests the atmosphere and mood that you want to create, and then use pathetic fallacy of the weather to create that mood and atmosphere and the setting. Just the last thing to say, Year 11, massive good luck. Don't forget to use your time wisely, be confident, because confidence is everything in the language exam, and all of us, all of your teachers, we all believe in you, so just go in there and try your best.